If you have an asset and you have to transfer that asset to another party for them then to do something on your behalf to generate a return, in some jurisdictions and some interpretations, that actor doing that may be a regulated actor. Why? Because they have a custodial risk and potential information asymmetries, and also your returns are 100% based upon their efforts and their efforts alone. You're not in a common enterprise where you're working together. Rather, you have just lent or given with an expectation of return an asset to them to do something on your behalf.
With the Securities and Exchange Commission's (SEC) crackdown on crypto staking by ordinary investors in the United States, staking is no longer permitted. Numerous notable industry figures have condemned the regulator's strong regulation of the digital assets market as a whole. Cathie Wood, the founder of ARK Invest, cautioned in one of her tweets that the SEC's regulatory position would push investors out of the United States and into more hospitable countries and territories. Charles Hoskinson, the founder of Cardano, has similar beliefs with the prominent hedge fund manager. In one of his recent broadcasts, Hoskinson, unlike others who have weighed in on the subject, highlights the impact of the regulatory assault on staking services on the broader cryptocurrency business. Hoskinson is not wholly critical of regulators' crackdown on centralized exchanges that offer staking services, such as Kraken. He feels that the change will be beneficial to small staking pools and will increase decentralization. Please share and click the like button as the entrepreneur and developer expresses his opinions on custodial staking models and the current battle with the SEC.
This is where the rub kind of comes in. When you compare that with a Bitcoin model of Bitcoin mining pools or a Cardano model with a Cardano stake pool, the custody of the underlying asset, in the case of Bitcoin, it's your hash resources, so your actual work payload. In case of Cardano, it's the synthetic resources. They still belong to you. And what you've done is you've delegated it to them, and now you're collectively working together, you and others, to perform an action, to build a block. And only if that work is done are you guaranteed a return. But you have to actually do the work to get the return. Okay, so it's a very different model, and there's no information asymmetry. You both know the same thing. There's no custodial risk, and the return is as based on your efforts as it is based on the efforts of the pool. But both of these are technically proof of stake. And the matter gets further conflated and contaminated when you also look at the fact that a lot of these staking services, they go beyond staking and potentially put it into some sort of DeFi play to augment the yield, which means that perhaps there's a risk there. Or in some cases, to give you liquidity, they issue a synthetic asset and say, here's this thing and it has redemption rights. There's all kinds of variations here, especially if there's a bonding component and there's an opportunity cost to losing access to those funds. Okay, so none of this is figured out. And every jurisdiction is going to have a slightly different opinion. And it's very clear that it looks like the SEC is converging to a point where perhaps the very least that exchanges doing this on your behalf is problematic. Now, I'm not going to complain too much about exchanges getting out of the staking business because, I would like small stake pool operators and I would like staking to be very distributed and decentralized. And it feels intrinsically uncomfortable if one entity has 40% of the resources and basically they don't even own that asset, and yet they're able to vote with it and stake with it and do other things. It's probably better to pull that off of exchanges if possible. So that's a good thing. But that said, it is an inconvenience to the industry as a whole. And that's because what usually happens is they try to apply one-size-fits-all interpretations and understandings to nuanced things. So if Ethereum staking, for example, in its current model with the majority of its actors is a regulated activity, they may just decide that all staking is a regulated activity and say, well, fuck you, litigate it in court, and we'll figure it out. I'm not saying they're going to do that, but I'm saying that is in this spectrum of options and possibilities as a result of these actions. And obviously, if there is a settlement between Kraken and the SEC, something will come of it, and we can read more and kind of dig into the facts and circumstances and try to really understand where the problem point is in the analysis and why people have issues. But again, it's a very nuanced topic. So if you're a stake pool operator and you may become regulated, or there's a pseudo-regulation, there's layers to that. With the infrastructure bill that was passed in the United States, there's this unenforced statutory mandate about this concept of collection of information about the people that you have a business relationship with. So it was a stupid thing. Toomey and others really tried hard to remove it from the bill, and unfortunately, politics got in the way, and it passed with a very bad provision. A strict interpretation of the U.S. infrastructure bill would say if you're a stake pool operator and someone's delegated to you, you have a KYC requirement to know enough about that person if requested to be able to provide that information to an actor like the IRS or something like that. Okay. Now, in practice, Treasury Department says they're not going to enforce that. This said, it is an interesting question about starting to change staking models to accommodate regulatory nuances. It's important to point out, as it stands right now, it does not seem that any complaint about the Ethereum custodial staking model is transitive to the Cardano liquid non-staking model. And it's certainly something that should be litigated if somebody asserts that, because I think it's completely wrong and there's no facts and circumstances to equivocate the two. I think we fall under the same work package model as Bitcoin mining pools, which have been in operation for almost 13 years in our industry without incident or complaint. But obviously there's going to be a national discussion now about these things, especially now that Kraken and others are getting involved. It does not appear that there's any attempt to say, oh, well, staking mechanics somehow now make the underlying asset a security. You'll probably see a lot of FUD over Twitter, Reddit, and other places saying, oh, well, if staking is a security, that must mean the underlying asset is. So Ether is now a security, or ADA is now a security. Let's be very clear. You can take wheat, which is a commodity, or gold, a commodity, and put it into some sort of package or structuring where that package is a security or that activity that you're doing with it is regulated. But that doesn't make wheat or gold a security. So you don't have that transitivity there where what you do with stake pools could infer the underlying asset has a problem. And we haven't seen any attempt to do that at the moment. Now, obviously, again, governments are unpredictable. Facts and circumstances could change, and we see things the same time you guys do. So we'll cross that bridge if it comes. But as it stands right now, the ecosystem is fine. So I don't think there's any issue with Cardano as it sits. I don't think there's any issue with our staking model as it sits. Unfortunately, conflation of what Ethereum is doing with Cardano may drag us in an uncomfortable direction, and we as an industry have to work on these nuances and details. The good news is that there's plenty of other ecosystems that have more sensible consensus models, and as a result would likely litigate and fight bad things. Maybe all this goes away with the US government changing from one political party to another, and they're more reasonable than the current one about the status of cryptocurrencies in the United States. Or maybe a law is passed that creates statutory clarity about where and when and what we're supposed to do. Like FIA had this concept of an auxiliary asset, for example. Until then, we're still living in the regulation by enforcement paradigm. And until then, we're still living in the we'll let you know and best of luck situation, which is the absolute worst way of running an economy. It's the absolute worst way of conducting business. It's ultimately counterproductive and destructive. And all it does is convince people to offshore and blacklist the United States, which is happening en masse now. And our loss is Dubai's gain, and our loss is Switzerland's gain and other jurisdictions. It's not to say there aren't bad actors. Every industry has them. FTX is the pinnacle of that for our industry, but it's just one of many that we've dealt with for almost 14 years now, whether it be Silk Road or Mt. Gox or BitConnect or OneCoin. These things do happen. And oftentimes they have the exact same structure, which is, wasn't the crypto, it wasn't a failure of a protocol, it was a centralized actor saying, trust us, you trusted them, and then they screwed you. By the way, custodial staking does suffer from this problem. If you give your funds to somebody else to do something with them, they can screw you too. That's why regulation exists. Regulation comes into play when these problems are there.
What are your thoughts on Charles Hoskinson's assertions that Ether and Cardano have confused models? Please leave your comments and thoughts in the space below, and be sure to like this video. Subscribe to the channel and enable post notifications to receive similar videos in the future.